You might pride yourself on your independence. You rarely ask for help, you pour yourself into your work, and you possess an almost psychic ability to read a room to keep everyone happy. Society views these as strengths, but for many, these aren't just personality quirks. They are deeply ingrained adaptations to an invisible psychological injury. Typically, we associate trauma with visible destruction, the arguments we can still hear, the disasters we survived, the events that leave an obvious, traceable scar. But a wound can also form in the quiet. It's the result of what failed to happen, the absence of comfort when you cried, or the lack of a parent who reflected your emotions back to you so you could learn they were real. When a child's emotional needs are met with a vacuum, the brain must invent its own ways to survive that silence. The quirky habits of the adult are often the survival strategies of the child. Physician and author Dr. Dagor Mate has spent decades exploring how these early experiences shape our adult lives. Mate defines trauma as the internal physiological and emotional wound that forms inside a person as a result of what they experienced. Like a physical scar, this psychological wound is rigid. It lacks the flexibility of healthy tissue, remaining raw and sensitive long after the original injury occurs. This internal scarring often disconnects a child from their own feelings as a means of protection. Eventually, the child's survival behaviors become so automatic that they appear to be their fundamental identity. To see how this manifests, we look at the brain's stress regulation hardware, specifically the HPA axis. In a neglectful environment, the body's stress response remains constantly activated, flooding the system with cortisol. Normally, a parent helps a child name their distress, connecting sensations to language. Without that mirroring, the child's language centers never learn to process internal alarms, leaving the adult unable to translate their body's feelings. This biological impact is measurable. Research on children raised in severe deprivation shows that this chronic stress compromises brain growth and the immune system, creating a vulnerability to chronic illness later in life. This means emotional numbness or chronic anxiety isn't a character defect. It's a biological adaptation, survival gear built to endure an emotionally barren environment. This neglect is rarely born of intentional malice. Most parents provide only what they themselves received, passing down their own unresolved wounds. This transmission can begin in utero. High levels of stress hormones in a pregnant mother can impact the development of the child's nervous system before they even take their first breath. As they grow, children subconsciously absorb the behavioral blind spots and unexpressed tension of the adults around them. Pain and stress flow generationally. In many cases, an adult's struggle with self-worth is an inherited physiological response to an ancestral chain of stress. Because a child cannot physically escape a stressful home, they must adapt psychologically. These adaptations generally fall into the 4F responses. The flight response manifests as workaholism, escaping into endless labor to outrun the pain. Fawning shows up as chronic people-pleasing, making themselves as accommodating as possible. The freeze response leads to emotional shutdown. The brain walls off its feelings completely to avoid further disappointment. These behaviors were not flaws. They were logical, brilliant pieces of psychological armor that successfully kept a child safe when they had no other options. The tragedy for many adults is that they are still wearing this armor long after the environment that required it has disappeared. This survival gear now comes at a high cost. It actively prevents the very things most survivors want: genuine connection, the ability to be seen, and the freedom to have needs. Healing begins when you recognize that your anxiety or hyperindependence is not a defect to be fixed. It is evidence of what you endured, a sign that your body was working perfectly to protect you. No human being is damaged goods. Many are simply stuck wearing heavy, outdated gear from a war that is already over. The same biological systems that adapted to neglect can also adapt to safety. Through neuroplasticity, the brain can physically rewire these trauma responses. This doesn't require a dramatic, sweeping transformation. It happens through conscious, almost invisible little micro-steps in your daily life. It's waiting 5 seconds before reflexively saying sorry for something that wasn't your fault, or stating a simple preference for dinner instead of saying, "I don't care, you pick." These tiny moments of taking up space prove to your nervous system that the danger has passed. They are the small, quiet signals that tell your body it is finally safe to let down the guard. You survived. Now you are allowed to thank your armor for its service, put it down,